Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Critica.NYC, a show dedicated to the work, life, and politics of the Latino community in New York City and beyond. Again, I am your host, Raquel Batista, and today I have the pleasure of doing this show from the Bronx. I am here in New York City for the next few weeks, doing some work and reconnecting with family and friends. And I'm really happy to be back because I just love and adore New York. There's no other place in the world like New York City. And this week we are remembering and reflecting on the fact that we have been in this pandemic now for the last year. And communities throughout New York City, New York State have been coming together to mourn all the people, all of our loved ones, family, friends, co-workers, neighbors that we've lost in this last year. We're also mourning the life that we had before the pandemic and how much our lives have changed in the last year. And we are reflecting on all that we've experienced and where are we on our way ahead. And so today, I really wanted to dedicate all of our New Yorkers, our fearless New Yorkers who have been on the front lines, working hard day in and day out to help us through this pandemic as we've adjusted our lives to this whole situation. And I know that for me in particular, I had made the decision to leave New York because I was fearful, like a lot of people. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what the lockdowns would mean for me as a single mother of a young child, not knowing, what was in store for the future and having to make decisions, for me and for my family to make sure that we could survive through this pandemic. And not to say that, right, the pandemic is not over. We are still very much in a pandemic, but we have learned a lot of things along the way in terms of how to take care of ourselves as much as we can, right? Following the guidelines from the CDC, as confusing the messages we were all getting, right, from the former president and, several of his supporters and allies. And also, the confusion that there was. We can't forget that there was a lot of confusion at the beginning last March, February, March, because we know that this was something that was coming, right? Some of us were aware about what was happening in places like China, and then we started hearing the stories of what was happening in places like Italy. And actually, I had a very good friend of mine, her name is Betsy, who lives in Italy. And she was one of the people that actually sent me a message and told me what was happening there. And basically, letting me know that I needed to prepare myself and my family at that time. And so I did, and I heeded her messages, and I made that decision to, do the things that I had to do for myself and for my family. But not everyone has been afforded those sorts of opportunities. Not everyone has had those kind of privileges where they had another place to be, another place that they could go to. Some people have been in this pandemic really all by themselves at home. Um, a lot of women out there who have been caring for themselves and for their families on their own, trying to figure it out day to day, trying to see how they're going to make ends meet, and we've had a lot of discussions and debates around these issues, right? Everything from what was going to happen with unemployment to now already have having 3 stimulus bills that have passed through the Congress, to be able to provide money to the states so that they can continue to function and they can continue providing emergency services and services for the pandemic, to having unemployment unavailable. And, I really, now having really looked at how life is and the politics are in other states in this country, while of course, New York has its challenges. New York really is a unique and wonderful place where we have some progressive elected officials that really look out for the community and making sure that the community is being provided for and helped and assisted throughout this whole situation. And I really want to also thank all the people who were out there putting together mutual aid, just putting, como, like how they say in Spanish, mano a la obra, to make sure that people were getting food, toiletries, and other necessities, as we were all trying to figure out, in particular at the beginning of the pandemic, trying to figure out what exactly all of this would mean for us. And so here we are a year later, and it really is incredible, right? None of us, and I know for me in particular, expected to even be in this situation, right? No one thought that we could be in this pandemic. And while, we know that there were a lot of high level conversations happening about the possibility of a pandemic, and that Obama had created a committee, which then the former president decided to disband. And, we see footage from shows like Oprah from 20 years ago, where you had experts discussing this issue of this potential airborne virus that could really impact how we function as a society. We, sadly, were not prepared. And so I think that, I know for me, it has really been a lesson in what are we doing to really plan our lives better, right? Be prepared for emergencies, being prepared for ourselves and for our families and for our communities to have the ability to appropriately respond, and really learning that, we cannot always rely on government or, corporations or billionaires to help us, right? We need to, help ourselves many of the times and just make things happen. But with that said, that doesn't necessarily mean, right, that they get off the hook or that there is no responsibility that they bear. There has been a lot of conversations around what is the responsibility of billionaires and millionaires, and especially those who have profited from this pandemic, and how are they going to help the communities that they've benefited from, right? And we've heard a lot of talk, especially here in New York State, about taxing the rich and making sure that those who have benefited, like Amazon and like other huge companies, that they are given the task that they need to put that money back into the community, and to make sure that communities are sustainable, right? And really giving that opportunity that those funds go for emergency services, for our schools, for the pandemic, right? Being able to put together these huge efforts like at Yankee Stadium, at the Armory in Washington Heights, and in other locations throughout the city. All of that requires not only manpower, but it requires money to make those things happen. And so, I am in full agreement with the fact that we really need to look at other ways as to how government will be funded and supported. And one of those that has not been sufficiently explored is the idea of taxing the rich. But all of this also brings me to this really wonderful campaign that Reshma Sajwani, who is the CEO of Girls Who Code, I believe now she's transitioning out of that role, and there is a new CEO. She has proposed a policy called the Marshall Plan for Moms. And basically in her policy, she is recommending that mothers should be paid monthly. I believe it's up to $2,400 a month for being able to take care of their children. And as many of us know, mothers and women in particular have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, in that many women lost their jobs, right? They lost their income, whether they were, laid off, fired, furloughed, or they are, independent entrepreneurs. And because of the lockdowns and because of all of these huge adjustments that we have had to make in our day-to-day lives, women had to, and primarily women, of course, right? We can talk about, I'm sure there are men out there and, and others who have been directly impacted, of course, by this pandemic. But, when it comes to many women, especially single mothers, they had to make a decision, right, about whether or not what was going to happen to their child in terms of school. Some folks decided, hey, I'm going to stay home with my children. My children are not going to go back to school. In many instances, because of the hybrid model, right, who was going to be home on the days that the kids needed to be home? And so those decisions needed to be made as to, who would be taking on the work of being a caregiver, right? And, today I just also wanted to highlight quickly, I'm wearing a really wonderful sweatshirt that I just got, which says, "The present is female." And, as we're looking at changes in leadership, right, throughout the city and the state, and the role of women, I think that, our leaders really need to be called upon to look at how they're going to support women throughout this pandemic, women who are, and caregivers, right? the people who are home, taking care of our children, taking care of the elderly, taking care of their family members throughout this whole ordeal, and being able to support those families. And so I just want to, congratulate Reshma on this wonderful proposal that has been made. I don't know what kind of traction it has gotten so far. There's been a lot of coverage in, New York Times and several other outlets. And I know this definitely has the attention of elected officials in Washington. And it's something that we all should really be looking towards as to how we're going to continue to support the backbone of our community, which are women and caregivers who are there for us day in and day out. Another interesting piece that I read recently is about how Latino men have really been impacted by the pandemic. And this article was about Latino men in New Jersey, and how there's been a huge number of Latino men, particularly within fathers, right? Fathers of young children who have passed away due to COVID. And this really makes me think about, when we're thinking about these issues of this virus and the number of deaths that there have been in the United States, and what communities it has really hurt. Of course, we have to talk about Latinos, African American, indigenous communities have really borne the brunt of this pandemic in the number of deaths. And, this article really talked about how this really impacted Latino men and families. And what are these children going to do now that their father has passed, right? Some families we know have lost both parents and have left children orphaned. Some families, only one parent has died, but now the parent who is here has to really figure out what they're going to do with this loss of income, the loss of a loved one who was very important to the emotional stability of a family. These are all very, very sad truths that we must confront and know how we're going to deal with these things. But also, we have lost a lot of our elderly. There are some families that have lost a whole generation, where all the grandparents have passed away during this pandemic. And some of those families, it's right due to the coronavirus, or, it was just a natural death that came about. But, this is also something that really makes me think about, the knowledge that we're losing, the culture that we're losing, the stories that we're losing. And, what are we doing as a community to make sure that all of those stories, all of that knowledge is not lost with this generation that is leaving us. There's so much that they brought with themselves. Many of our elderly are folks who have immigrated, right, from the Dominican Republic, from Puerto Rico, and from other places. And hopefully, some got to, meet all of their families. Others may have not. Some were able to pass away with their families. Others were all alone. And so all of these things have really been, devastating. And, I do think about what this is going to leave in our psyche? How is this going to impact our future generations? And I myself think of myself, I'm a mom, and I always talk about how I'm a mom, and many of you have seen Carmen and my daughter come on screen every once in a while to say hello. And now, folks, especially my generation, right, we're the ones now really taking the lead, and really becoming the matriarchs and the patriarchs of our families. And for some families, right, this kind of fell on their shoulders very quickly with this pandemic. And so what is that going to look like in our futures? Throughout the last several months, we've had a lot of different wonderful guests here that have discussed a variety of issues. We had two experts, Karina and Dayanara, to talk about the importance of getting mental health services, having a therapist, having someone who you can really talk to, about these issues and how to move forward, right? As time goes on, and hopefully, and we pray, right, with this with all the new vaccines that we're seeing, and people going out and getting their vaccines, that we will be able to resume some modicum of what life was before the pandemic. I personally don't believe that we're going to be back completely to what we had anytime soon, right? And while some people really want to act like we're ready to go, right? And we see states like Texas and Georgia and others that have decided to lift the mask mandate, right? And, want to have everything open and keep businesses open 100%. And, that is, for me, it does make me quite sad, right? That we still have this situation where we don't have a real uniform, way of addressing this pandemic, right? And I feel, from my perspective, that when there is no mandate for a mask, it really leaves the onus on the people, right? There are people who want to, protect themselves and are wearing their masks and doing all the things they need to do. But then, you'll have groups of people who are not. And the people who bear the brunt of this are our emergency rooms. They're the ones who are in our hospitals. They're the ones who really see what it means to not have the mask mandate. Because while you have a mask mandate, that kind of makes people think about it twice, right? Sometimes you need to have these kind of policies in place so that people will think about it twice. And, there's some people who do not think beyond themselves, right? Sadly. And there's other people who, choose not to, and I'm not necessarily judging individuals' decisions around whether or not to wear a mask. But when governments decide to send these particular messages, it has ripple effects in communities. And it does make things harder. And it really is just too bad in those places. But I just want to continue just supporting the idea of wear your masks, and continue protecting yourselves throughout this whole scenario. But just to now, move into a little bit of what is happening now and what's going to happen now, right? So we finally got the last stimulus bill, the third stimulus bill, which Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a really great rundown on what the stimulus package is going to bring to us. Even though, like, as she said, we didn't get all the things, right? But there is a lot to come. And some of those monies, right, is going to go towards the states and funding things like unemployment, and other things that need to get funded at the state level. But for individuals, right, we're waiting on those checks, right? I haven't gotten mine yet, but I'm hoping to get mine soon. And I'm happy for all of those who may have gotten your checks in the last few days, right? They said that checks were going to start being available during the weekend. And what was announced is that each person in a family would be receiving $1,400 for those families that earn $75,000 or less in a year. And they'll be looking at past taxes that have been filed. So, those of you who qualify, and I know that there's a lot of other rules there for when there's a family of two, I believe it's 150,000 or something like that, that are going to be able to receive that stimulus check. So, that is coming down the pike. I also understand that there's a lot of other tax benefits that have been mentioned in the bill. One major one, and what AOC entitled the Easter egg, is that if the student loans are forgiven, it would not be treated as income. So that's huge, right? And the call has been put out for all of you who have student loans. I know I myself still have student loans. And I finished my education over 20 years, almost 20 years ago, and I still have my student loans. We have to put the pressure on. We got to call our representatives. We have to, send the message that we need the student loans to be canceled. Let's cancel the student debt. It has been detrimental already, even before the pandemic. And now it's just, especially for so many people who have lost jobs, have lost income. And being able to cancel this student debt would really alleviate that pressure of having to come up with that monthly payment that one needs to make, and hopefully create a situation where people could be saving, right? Saving for emergencies, saving for a home, taking care of their loved ones right now, not having to choose between a light bill or buying food, not having to choose between being able to pay their rent or buying food. Those are things, right? And those are essentials. And everyone is also entitled to a little bit of, treating yourselves every once in a while. You have to have a little bit of flexibility. And so, these are all things that, while, we know how it feels, this is why it's important that we keep the pressure on, because, it's not over, right? Just because we have a new administration with President Biden, and we no longer have the former administration, and that we've been able to change the Senate thanks to Georgia, right? And New York needs to continue sending its love and support to Georgia, right? And I just want to highlight that in Georgia right now, there has been a lot of pushback on the voter laws in Georgia. And currently, there are changes taking place in order to suppress voters in Georgia. You know, a lot of the leadership that was there, like former Senator David Perdue, has been talking about and saying that Georgia is not a blue state. This is what he says. He says Georgia is not a blue state. And the Republicans in Georgia have been putting on a fight to be able to reduce the number of people to and access to the vote. You know, they want to put an end to basically mail-in voting. They want to put an end, they want to limit the hours that the polls can be open. They want to limit early voting. They want to take away voting on Sundays. And there's a whole slew of legislation that has actually passed in Georgia. And as some of you may know, in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, there has been a voting rights package that has passed in the House to protect and expand voting rights. And this issue is going to continue to be, you know, on the table. And it's something that is really important, right? Because the Republicans are looking to change the game. They want to change the rules because it's no longer working for them. And, you know, this is where we need to not forget, right? All the work that we've put in will continue for us to continue working. We have to continue, you know, when we can, you know, marching in the streets. We have to continue exercising our vote. We have to continue supporting candidates that support legislation that is beneficial for communities. We have to continue making those phone calls to our elected officials. Because the reality is, right, in a pandemic setting, we can't do a lot of the things that we used to do, right? Like when we would pack up a bus and head to Albany, or get on the bus and go to Washington, D.C. Those things have changed for now. And so for now, we need to really think about, how am I going to exercise my voice and get myself heard by my elected officials? And this is where it's important, where we need to pick up that phone, send that email, do that tweet, do an Instagram, do your TikTok, whatever it is, right? To be able to send the message. And, you know, just bringing it back to Georgia, we need to keep our eyes on Georgia. We need to continue supporting the local organizations there, like Fair Fight, like the New Georgia Project, like the Latino Community Fund, like Galeo, the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. All of those people who have been working tirelessly over the years, over the decades, to assure that voters, that women, people of color, LGBTQ, the marginalized are able to have their voices heard. And, you know, the Senate is in a delicate balance, right? We have 50-50, you know, 50-50. And those 50 Democratic votes are not always necessarily guaranteed, right? Because we do have conservative Democrats out there in other states. So these are things that we need to always keep on our minds and being aware of, and knowing that we have to continue keeping the pressure up in order for us to really see significant changes. You know, we have all, I believe, learned our lessons through this pandemic, you know, and this is why it's so important that we all continue paying attention to what's happening. We have to continue paying attention to what is going on in our governments, in our communities, and making sure that we just don't stand aside and that we are present for these conversations. So this brings me to, what's going to be happening over the next few months, right? We have some major changes happening in New York City, where literally half of the New York City Council is term limited out. And we have hundreds of candidates who have been out there. I'm sure some of you have gotten a knock at your door to sign a petition. And people have been working really since January and even in the year before to get their names and their faces out there so that you know who your candidates are. And this is a really important time for New York City, where we're going to be seeing a change at the mayoral level, right? De Blasio is term limited out, and we have several candidates that are running at the mayoral level, right? We have Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, Diane Morales, Scott Stringer, and others who are running for that position. And we're starting to see, the endorsements, who people are supporting, the numbers in fundraising. And this is a very important race, because whoever is going to be the next mayor is really going to have to take the bull by the horns, right? We are going to be facing, and we are facing, some serious financial issues at the city because of this pandemic. And we need to have someone who is not only going to be a strong leader, but someone who's really going to advocate on behalf of the community and really going to be there to assure that important essential services are not cut. We know that usually the first things to go are youth services. The first thing to go are senior citizen services. The first thing to go and to cut is public education. And we need to make sure that we are keeping our eyes open on these issues and making sure that our children's future are really secured, right? And that we look at what is going to happen with our public schools, right? Recently, we saw that the Chancellor Carranza has resigned, and we now have a new chancellor, a woman from the Bronx. I cannot recall her name at this moment, but she is taking the helm of the Department of Education. And, I know there's been a lot of criticisms around that as well. We all know that the public education system pre-pandemic was already in a very precarious situation, where our local schools were not receiving the funds that are owed to our schools. We haven't been getting the sufficient number of, when we start talking about issues of class size and teachers and diversity and, police in schools and so many things, right? And now, I see this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity right now, especially with the big changes in government, with the change in the mayor, with the change in the New York City Council, to really take a hard look at our schools, at our local schools. And what are they going to do? Once we start really being able to bring our kids back into the classroom, how are we going to address this lag that we've had because of the pandemic? There's a lot of kids, that have not been able to really fully, engage. They don't like remote. Their schools get closed every 2 weeks because of someone or several people have gotten the virus at the school, so they have to shut down. There's been a lot of interruptions and eruptions and all sorts of things in the schools. And so, we really need to rethink, right, these issues of testing, these issues of, what is going to be the best environment for our children. And we know that in the Latino community in particular, we've always been lagging behind in numbers of graduation rates, in our children being able to attend, the specialized schools and the gifted programs. A lot of these things now are being phased out. A lot of these things are going to be changing. And so, there's going to be a lot to do on this issue of education. And, it's interesting because in the Bronx, we have a special election coming up. There's a special election coming up next week, next Tuesday, March 23rd. There's elections in District 15 and in District 11. And we know that in District 11 takes up a large part of the Northwest Bronx. It includes Riverdale and parts of Bedford Park, Marshallou Parkway, and those areas of the Bronx. And District 15 is actually a district. I used to live there. And many years ago, I also ran for the New York City Council, and I ran in District 15. I unfortunately lost that race. But definitely a moment where I got to learn a lot about the politics, right? The politics in the Bronx. And the Bronx is also going to be undergoing huge changes, right? Like the rest of the city, we're going to have new borough presidents. And all of this is an opportunity for us to really, right, kind of look at this as a new slate, right? And how we're going to be able to elect good people, smart people into these positions. One of the things that worries me is that while I do believe, there's a lot of really wonderful candidates out there, very diverse set of candidates in all of these races, right? Women and men, young people, older folks, LGBTQ, Latino, African American, Asian. Like, it really is a diverse set of candidates in all of these races. But as things are shaping up, right, in terms of who's getting the endorsements of the establishment, who's getting the endorsements from the unions, who's getting the endorsements from the progressive left, right? When we look at like the Democratic Socialist Association and the Working Families Party. And, I do get concerned a little bit about how our whole New York City Council is going to look, how it's going to feel. And while, of course, I definitely want it to be as diverse as possible, I also want to make sure that as we're getting in more women and also young people, right, younger people into the political sphere, I also want us to be looking at these really smart and well-prepared and experienced candidates that are new, right? Let's say, quote unquote, new to the electoral scene, maybe not necessarily new to politics, but that we don't pass over those folks because they can really bring something to the table that maybe not necessarily others will, because they've been in government, they've been at the table, they really have a deep understanding of the issues and have been preparing themselves for a really long time. And so I just want to say that because while I am very excited about a lot of really great and wonderful, new, fresh folks that are coming into the political scene, and that are, getting a lot of support, I think we also need to we need a healthy mix. We need a healthy mix of people in our New York City Council where we don't have, a lot of folks under the age of 35, but while I think that is very important, and they need to be at the table, let's not forget about our older folks who are super smart, very prepared, been at the table, and are being looked over because of that, right? And I think that there's a lot of reasons to why this happens, because sometimes, when it comes to our political process, people want to support someone who is more malleable, who maybe is not super set in their ways or super set in the way they're thinking, and are quote unquote easier maybe to work with. And so I think that those are things that we need to keep our eyes out for, right? Because we don't always, while, there are important endorsements and all of that occur in this, again, with the whole idea of Critica, is about us taking a critical look at what's happening, who's talking about the issues, how is this impacting our communities. And I think that we need to always think about those things as we are looking at our future leadership for our city, right? Because it's not always about the person who raises the most money. It's not always about the person who, may be the new darling, right? It's not always about that. We really need to take a look at each and every one of our candidates. And what makes this even more fun and interesting is ranked choice voting. This year, people are going to be able to rank all of the folks, right? So it's not that you just vote for one person, you actually vote for everyone who's on the slate. But you're going to say, this person is number one, this person is number two, this person is number three, this person is number four. And apparently, whoever gets the least votes, right, then all of their votes then kind of get tabulated again into those who are getting the higher votes until you have like your top two. And then whoever gets the most votes of the top two, that's the person who wins. Doesn't necessarily mean they get 50% of the vote. It just means that they get the most votes of everyone, right? I think I kind of understand what's happening with ranked choice voting. But this really does create an opportunity for someone to really rise to the top, not necessarily the person who, quote unquote, is the selected person and then they get elected. This really creates a space for people to be able to win it and not necessarily be the person with all of the endorsements and all of the money, right? And, what makes New York also a wonderful and unique place is the fact that we have public matching funds. And while that can be a lot of hard work, and to be able to qualify for those funds and manage those funds, it's a lot of work to do. You just don't get the cash, right? And there's a lot of accountability and transparency that happens with that process, which is always very impressive to me, I have to say. But this also really creates, the ability for a lot of people who may have otherwise not been able to run to be able to be a part of the conversation and being able to expand the debate and the issues that we're talking about and what we are looking at. So, I say everyone just keep an eye out on what's happening. Keep an eye out on what's happening in the Bronx special election on March 23rd. And I believe we're already in early voting for that election. That's District 15 and District 11. So if you are a voter and you live in those districts, please make sure to pay attention and get yourself out to vote. And I'd like to then, bring our attention to what's happening with our New York State governor, with Governor Cuomo. And we know that all eyes are on Cuomo right now. All eyes are on what is happening with his administration in terms of the sexual harassment accusations that have been placed against the governor, the issues around the nursing home data, and how that data has been managed or mismanaged. And what is this going to mean for his governorship, right? He says that he's not going to resign. He's not going to resign. And he is going to wait for the results of the investigations that are being led by Attorney General Letitia James. And we have seen several elected officials, both Republicans and Democrats, asking for his resignation, asking for him to be impeached. And so here we go. And here we go again. It seems like there is no governorship that has not undergone some sort of investigation. We saw this with Patterson. We saw this with Spitzer. And so here we are again. And, it's interesting with a guy like Cuomo, because Cuomo has really, he's been, around, and he's seen these investigations go down. He knows what happens during these investigations. So for me, it's kind of, interesting, the stance that he has taken. Also, I feel like, it's tough, right? Our state and our city has just gone through so much. And as a nation, we've already been through so much with the former president and his impeachment proceedings, and, quite frankly, I'm going to say I'm tired. I'm tired of seeing these elected officials that, don't know how to behave themselves, and then end up, with these issues. Right? The only guy we didn't see go through this was Obama. And, I want to see something different. I want to see that we, that things change, right? And obviously there is a signal being sent to Albany that things need to change when it comes to how women are treated, how employees are treated, right? We know that, while there are these sexual harassment accusations, there's also accusations about, just 1 second, please. There's accusations about how the employees are treated, how people, are not really respected or, given courtesies, right? People are being yelled at, and all sorts of things, right? And this happens in a lot of work situations, not only in politics. But, I think, right, people are tired. People are sick and tired of being mistreated, of being harassed. And so it is time for a change. And so while whatever's going to happen with Cuomo is going to happen, and we have to go through this process over the next several months. And it's really unfortunate, right? It's really unfortunate that, with all of what's happening, with this pandemic, with all that's been happening in our communities, with all the deaths, all of this stuff, that now we have to waste our time, waste the time of our elected officials. And I'm not saying that, right? We need to address these issues. These things need to be addressed head on, right? But my thing is, why is this even happening in the first place? This should not be happening in the first place. We cannot be wasting our time on it. There's very important things for our leaders to be doing instead of having all these ongoing sexual harassment accusations and investigations, right? All of you guys need to get it together. We need to stop the madness, right? We need to stop. You guys need to stop it. And so, I hope that, whatever comes out, and that the repercussions that need to be felt will be felt. But at the end of the day, it's really sad, but the community really suffers with this, right? Because this means time taken away from being able to address that are so pressing, right? To address these issues of the pandemic, of rolling out this vaccine, of addressing all the huge issues. But alas, this is who we have. But then this also needs to bring us, when we start thinking about 2022, and I'm like, I know you're like, Raquel, we're just in 2021. We have a governor's race that's going to be coming up. And so I couldn't tell you right now who the potential candidates will be for these positions. And will we get a woman to run for governor? Will we get a woman of color to run for governor? A Black woman, a Latina woman? That would be really wonderful. Things we need to really start thinking about and mulling over. Do we have in line? Who's prepared? Who's ready to run those campaigns, right? And to win. And so that we really have people at the forefront who are going to be fighting for us, for our children, right? So again, thank you everyone who's been watching Critica.NYC. You can find my information on Instagram. You can find information at www.critica.nyc. I want to thank again Zenaida Mendez, who is the executive producer for Critica.NYC, out to me last year, and for getting us to this point to have this show. I want to thank Freddie Pinto and the whole team that helps to put this together. Manhattan Neighborhood Network has been a wonderful platform for us to have these conversations. And so until next time, thank you, everyone, and have a good night.